I heard the click of his lighter before I saw him. It was a small sound, barely anything, metal against metal, precise and soft. But it cut through the ballroom noise like a blade through silk, and the room changed around it. Not louder, quieter. That was the first thing I learned about Dante Salvator. He did not have to raise his voice to rearrange the air. The DeLuca Winter Foundation Gala filled the Grand Oralia with old money, newer sins, and women in gowns that looked too expensive to breathe in. I had worn one anyway. Black silk, long sleeves, waist left a little looser than fashion preferred. My wedding ring still sat on my finger because taking it off felt like a betrayal and leaving it on felt like an invitation to pity. 4 months pregnant, 6 weeks widowed. And trying very hard not to be noticed. My husband Matteo had handled the foundation's offshore holdings. On paper, it was shipping, hospitality, charitable grants, maritime insurance. In reality, every ledger in that world had 2 versions, one for taxes, another for God, if God had ever agreed to look. Matteo used to joke that numbers were kinder than people, because they always confessed eventually. Then he died on the FDR with a bullet in his throat, and suddenly everyone around me had opinions about what I should wear, where I should live, and whether it was proper for a young widow to attend a gala so soon. No one asked if I wanted to come, they just told me it would look better if I did. I stood near the west staircase with a champagne flute I had no intention of drinking and breathed carefully through a wave of nausea. Chandeliers blurred. A violin quartet played something expensive and joyless. Men I had known for years smiled at me with that peculiar softness powerful people use when they have already begun discussing your future in other rooms. My palms slipped over my abdomen without thinking. I pulled it back immediately. Mrs. DeLuca, I turned. Vittorio Bellacia, one of Lorenzo Vitelli's polished lieutenants, bowed over my hand like he was born in the wrong century. He was handsome in the practiced way a knife could be called elegant. You look pale, he said. I'm grieving. His smile never moved. Of course, I knew that tone, the one that said he had not come to offer comfort, only inventory. Before I could answer, a young busboy came around the column too quickly, balancing a silver tray loaded with fresh flutes. Maybe 16, maybe younger. His hands were red from the kitchen heat. He caught the edge of my skirt and stumbled. The tray tilted, crystal tipped. He made a small sound of panic. Without thinking, I caught the tray with one hand and his wrist with the other. Champagne sloshed over my glove. The boy stared at me horrified as a manager across the room snapped his head toward us. I'm sorry, ma'am, the busboy whispered. Please, it was me, I said quietly. If anyone asks, it was my fault. His eyes widened. But go. He hesitated just long enough for me to see how scared he was of losing a job that probably fed more than one mouth. Then he nodded and disappeared into the current of black jackets and white cuffs. When I turned back, Vittorio was no longer looking at the spilled champagne. He was looking past me. So was everyone else. At the top of the short marble steps beside the balcony doors, a man stood under the low gold light with a silver lighter resting closed in his hand. Dante Salvator. I had seen him before, never close. Newspaper photos after charity auctions. A glimpse at my wedding where men twice Matteo's age had watched him with careful eyes. He was taller than memory allowed. Dark suit, no tie pin, no unnecessary shine. He held still the way some men held guns, with familiarity, not effort. It was not his face that unsettled me. It was the restraint in it. He looked at people the way surgeons might look at flesh before the cut. His gaze moved to my wet glove, then to my mouth, then to my hand, traitorous hand, hovering 1 inch too close to my stomach. My pulse tripped, he knew, not because I was showing, not really, but because men like Dante Salvator did not survive by missing tremors. Vittorio recovered first. Dante, no title, no warmth. Dante descended the steps without hurry. Around us, conversation tried to resume and failed. When he stopped in front of me, the scent of cold air and cedar came with him, as if the night had entered the ballroom wearing his coat. His eyes dropped once more to my hand. Mrs. DeLuca, he said. His voice was low enough to be private. That made it worse. I nodded because my throat had become decorative. Mr. Salvator, one corner of his mouth shifted, not a smile. Recognition of fear, maybe. You should sit down. It was not phrased like a command, it still felt like one. I'm fine, you're trembling. Heat flared under my skin. I said I'm fine. For the first time, his eyes lifted fully to mine. Most men, when they looked at me after Matteo died, did one of two things. They softened or they assessed. Dante did neither. He watched me as if he had caught a sentence halfway spoken and wanted the rest. Vittorio stepped in. I'm sure Mrs. DeLuca is capable of deciding whether she wishes to sit. Dante did not turn his head. I wasn't asking you. Silence opened between them like a blade slipping from velvet. I should have walked away. I knew that. Matteo had once taken my face in both hands and told me very gently that if Dante Salvator ever paid too much attention to me, I should leave the room. I had laughed then. I was not laughing now. Another wave of nausea rolled through me, stronger this time. My knees softened. The ballroom lights stretched, cruel and glittering. Before I could disgrace myself on the marble, Dante caught my elbow. The contact was brief, devastating. His hand was bare, warm, and impossibly steady. No clutching, no claim, just support. Enough to keep me vertical, enough to make the room witness it. Vittorio's expression changed. There it was, I thought dimly, the real danger, not that Dante had touched me. That everyone else saw him choose to. I can stand on my own, I whispered. I know, he said, but he did not let go immediately. The pause was tiny, a heartbeat maybe two. Still, it burned through me. Not desire, not yet. Just the first unbearable awareness of what it might mean for a man like him to decide your body was now part of his field of attention. Then he released me and took the champagne flute from my fingers. You're done pretending to drink this. The words might have embarrassed me if he had said them cruelly. He didn't. He said them like fact. Vittorio tried a smile. Careful, Dante, people will start talking. They already are. His eyes returned to me, to the pulse in my throat, to the hand I had curled into my skirt so it would stop shaking. Then he spoke so quietly only I heard him. Easy, little saint. I stared at him. Little saint, it should have offended me. It should have sounded mocking, considering he had just watched me lie to save a busboy from being fired, while I stood in a room full of men who could ruin lives before dessert. Instead, something cold moved through me, because he had noticed, not the gown, not the widow's ring, not the performance, that, the manager approached, face tense. Mrs. DeLuca, are you all right? We heard there was an incident. It was my fault, I said immediately. I caught the tray badly. The manager looked confused. Dante looked at me as if some private equation had just completed itself. Vittorio's gaze dropped to my abdomen and flicked back up. I saw the exact moment he started wondering. Dante saw it too. When he turned to Vittorio, the temperature changed. Tell Lorenzo, Dante said, each word almost gentle, that Sofia De Luca is leaving with my security tonight. My breath stopped. Vittorio laughed once because men like him often mistook calm for negotiable. On what authority? Dante slid the silver lighter into his pocket. Mine, I found my voice. I didn't agree to that. No, he said, still watching Vittorio, but you will. Something in me flared at that, fear, grief, outrage, all braided together. You don't decide where I go. Now he looked at me again, fully. Tonight, he said, I decide who gets close enough to ask. The quartet kept playing. Someone dropped a fork across the room. I became acutely aware of the weight of every eye not looking at us. Vittorio's smile had thinned to wire. Lorenzo won't like this. Dante's expression did not alter. I didn't ask what he likes. He stepped aside then, just enough to reveal two of his men by the balcony doors. They had been there the entire time, silent, waiting. That frightened me more than the threat did. It meant the decision had been made the moment he saw me, the moment he saw my hand shake and not spill for myself. The moment he understood what I was hiding. And maybe, somehow worse, the moment he realized someone else had understood it too. I should have refused. I should have called for my aunt, for the foundation board, for anyone whose name sounded respectable enough to interrupt a mafia king in a ballroom full of chandeliers and polite lies. Instead, I looked at Vittorio, then at the staircase, then at Dante, and knew with a clarity so sharp it almost felt clean that whatever door had brought me into that gala had already shut behind me. Get my coat, Dante said to no one I could identify. A man moved instantly. The room did not breathe until I followed him out. The city looked different from behind Dante Salvator's armored glass. Cleaner somehow, more distant. The filth and wet neon of Manhattan slid past in streaks of winter light, while the inside of the car held a silence so expensive it felt deliberate. I sat in the far corner of the back seat with my coat buttoned to my throat, and my widow's ring turned inward against my palm. Across from me, Dante read messages on his phone like men's lives were being edited by his thumb. Maybe they were. I had not spoken since leaving the gala. I told myself it was because I was thinking. In truth, I was listening to my own pulse and trying not to be sick on hand-stitched leather. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, mid-30s. Dark curls, kind eyes, suit straining slightly over a body built by someone who loved pasta more than cardio. Before anyone says I drive like a criminal, he said, I want the record to show I am driving like a gentleman criminal. I blinked. He offered a hand backward without taking his eyes off the road. Gianni Rixai, logistics, driver, occasional hostage negotiator when our cook finds out I threw away her cannoli. I did not throw them away, Dante said. Gianni sighed. Boss, with respect, saying you gave them to the guards is not making it better. Against my will, I looked at him again. He caught it in the mirror. There, that was almost a smile. Marta owes me $10. Who's Marta? I asked before I could stop myself. The woman who feeds the household and plans my death by cream filling. Dante put his phone down. Gianni, what? I'm humanizing the kidnapping. I am not kidnapping her. Gianni lifted one shoulder. Of course not. We're merely transporting a grieving widow against her stated wishes for security reasons while armed men change routes every 3 blocks. I stared at Dante. You change routes, we've changed twice. My stomach tightened. Why? Because Vittorio Bellacia left the gala before you did. The answer sat between us. I pressed my hand flat over my coat, low enough to feel the shape beneath it that was still more prayer than person. So you decided I was in danger. I decided someone else had noticed what I noticed. The words were quiet, precise, no flourish. I hated that he could say so little and still make the inside of my ribs feel crowded. And what exactly did you notice? He held my gaze. That you were trying to hide a pregnancy while men connected to Lorenzo Vitelli watched you swallow panic and call it poise. The last shreds of denial left me all at once, not because he knew. Because he said it out loud, and the truth sounded heavier outside my body than it had inside it. Gianni cleared his throat gently and turned the radio down, as if volume might become indecent. You don't have the right, I began. No, Dante said. Lorenzo doesn't. Who said anything about Lorenzo? You being at his charity table after Matteo's death said enough. The use of my husband's name hurt in a place I had been carefully avoiding. Evening. Matteo had always spoken of Dante sparingly, respectfully, like one spoke of winter roads, dangerous, necessary, not to be trusted casually. They had grown up together in different branches of the same world. Matteo left the bloodier side of it for ledgers and offshore architecture. Dante stayed where power stained. I had loved one of them from the safe edges, now I was in a car with the other. I'm going home, I said. Dante looked out the window briefly. No, it was such a calm refusal that anger came to my defense before fear did. You keep saying things as if they're settled. They are. My apartment is not a war zone. No, he said. It's worse, it's predictable. I should have snapped back. Instead, I remembered the faces at the gala. Vittorio's gaze dropping, calculating, the way older women had touched my forearm too softly. The phone call from my late husband's aunt that afternoon, insisting the black dress with the higher neckline would photograph better. I had not told a soul about the baby. Which meant someone had either guessed or known enough about my body to do something more dangerous with the information. The car turned through wrought iron gates and climbed a private drive lined with cypress trees dusted in old frost. The house at the top was not a mansion in the flashy sense. It was worse. Stone, old money, disciplined windows, enough shadow to make you wonder where the guns were even when you knew the answer was everywhere. Absolutely not, I said as the car stopped. Gianni looked almost sympathetic. I said that the first time too, now I only say it before medical appointments and cardio. The front doors opened before anyone rang. Warm light spilled across marble. A woman in her 50s stood framed in it, broad-shouldered, silver streaks through black hair, apron over a dark dress. Face arranged in a look that suggested she had survived men with power by finding them fundamentally tiresome. She took one look at me, then at Dante. You brought her cold, she said. That was apparently not the correct thing to say to a mafia boss, because Gianni made a small choking noise that might have been a laugh. Marta, Dante said. What? She's shivering. I hadn't realized I was until she said it. The trembling had returned, small but relentless, not dramatic, worse than that, persistent. Marta approached with none of the caution everyone else seemed to use around him. She touched my elbow, maternal and firm. Come inside before I have to start insulting men on an empty stomach. Gianni brightened. There's food, she gave him a withering look, for her. You eat sadness, cruel, he muttered, following us in. This is why I have trust issues. The foyer smelled faintly of lemon oil and wood smoke. Somewhere deeper in the house, men's voices moved in low Italian. Not loud, controlled, the particular quiet of armed people pretending not to be. Dante removed his coat. A man appeared and took it without a word. That, more than the guns at the gates, told me what kind of world I had entered. A world built on invisible obediences. Marta led me into a sitting room with a fire already burning. She put a glass of water in my hand and vanished before I could protest, only to return with dry toast, sliced pear, and a small bowl of salted broth that smelled like childhood kitchens and impossible forgiveness. I looked at Dante. If this is supposed to make me less angry, it's supposed to keep you from fainting. He remained standing while I sat. I noticed that. Where he chose to position himself between me and the door, but not crowding, close enough to stop something, far enough that the choice felt functional instead of personal. I took one bite because the baby demanded it more than pride allowed otherwise. Now, I said after swallowing, you can explain. His expression did not change. Matteo handled funds routed through 3 ports Lorenzo Vitelli wanted control of. After Matteo died, 2 accounts moved within 48 hours. I stared. You think he was killed over money? I think money explains the first bullet, power explains the second. The bowl in my hands warmed my fingers, not enough. And me, you are his widow, that doesn't make me useful. His eyes dropped briefly to my stomach. It does now. I flinched, small, still humiliating, something passed across his face. It vanished too quickly to name. Listen carefully, Sophia. My name sounded different in his mouth, heavier. Until I know who knows about the baby, you stay here. I have doctors, a life. An apartment, you have guards now. I don't want guards. Want has very little to do with the next week. I set the bowl down too sharply. You don't get to decide everything. No, he said. Only the things that keep you alive. I hated the part of me that heard no arrogance in it, only certainty. He reached into his pocket then and placed something on the table between us. My apartment keys. They're mine, I said. For now, he replied. You don't go back there tonight. The fire snapped softly. Gianni hovered in the hall pretending not to eavesdrop. Marta hissed something at him in Italian that sounded medicinal and insulting. I looked at Dante and understood suddenly and completely that whatever this was, it had already moved past the point of asking. What are your rules? I said. His gaze held mine for one long beat, as though he knew exactly what it cost me to say it that way. Then he answered. You tell Marta or Lucia if something feels wrong physically. You do not leave this house without my security. You do not answer unknown numbers. And if anyone from Lorenzo's side contacts you, family, priest, lawyer. Friend, you tell me before you tell yourself a story about why it's harmless. And if I refuse, he was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then very softly he said, no one would reach you again without going through me first. That should not have sounded the way it did, but it did. I woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of a door locking somewhere down the hall. Not slamming, not dramatic, just the heavy, final mechanism of old metal settling into place. In Dante's house, even silence had hardware. I lay still in a bed too soft for panic and listened to the unfamiliar architecture breathe around me. A radiator clicked, wind brushed the windows. Somewhere below, men crossed marble in measured steps. My room smelled faintly of starch, cedar, and the lavender Marta must have tucked into the wardrobe shelves. I had not slept well since Matteo died. Grief made everything thin, time, appetite, memory, even fear, but fear returned at dawn, fresh and practical. When I found my phone on the bedside table, it had no service. That made me angrier than the locked doors. I dressed in one of Marta's borrowed cashmere sets because my gown from the gala had already been sent to a cleaner without anyone asking. The gesture was so efficient it was almost insulting. Downstairs, the house opened itself in stages. Arched hallways, dark paintings, iron sconces, a chapel tucked behind a narrow corridor as if God had been kept on retainer. The library was bigger than my old apartment, floor-to-ceiling shelves, walnut desk, fire dying low. And at that desk sat Dante Salvator, jacket off, white shirt sleeves rolled once, reading what looked very much like one of Matteo's foundation binders. My breath caught. That's mine. He looked up. It's the foundation S. It's my copy, then you know what's in it. I moved toward the desk before thinking better of it. The room smelled like paper, ash that had never fully burned, and that colder note I was beginning to associate with him, the outside dark still clinging to his skin even indoors. He turned the binder around and tapped a page. Tell me why a children's literacy grant in Newark routes through a Marina Insurance holding company in Palermo. I stared at the entries. Names, figures, transfer dates. To anyone else it might have looked like aggressive tax strategy. To me it looked wrong in 3 different ways because Matteo had taught me how to see it. Not the crimes, the patterns. He used to spread ledgers across our kitchen table and ask me what I noticed first. I would tell him what did not belong, a repeated digit. A charitable disbursement timed too close to a customs freeze. A shell entity built from saints' names because Italians got sentimental when they lied to banks. I stepped closer, forgetting for a moment where I was. This line item was altered after filing, I said. Dante's expression didn't shift, but I felt his attention sharpen. The decimals, I pointed. Matteo always aligned them exactly. Whoever changed this didn't know that he treated every column like sheet music. See. And this grant code, I traced it lightly with my finger, doesn't correspond to literacy, it maps to vessel maintenance. You're sure? Yes. His gaze moved from the page to me. How? I almost said because I helped him. Instead I said, because numbers are honest in the places people aren't. Something unreadable crossed his face. He stood then and I became painfully aware of how close I had drifted to him while leaning over the desk. My hand was still braced on the binder. His was resting beside it, not touching. Close enough that the heat of it altered the skin along the side of my thumb. And almost, the first of the morning, I straightened too fast. Matteo used coding habits, repetition, music almost. He thought if anyone ever skimmed his work, they would miss the rhythm. Dante reached into his pocket. The silver lighter clicked open, then shut, a small sound. My body had already learned it. He told you this. He didn't tell me everything, I said carefully, but he knew I saw structure well. When I was little, my father ran a neighborhood grocery with terrible bookkeeping. If the books failed, the lights failed. I learned fast. You were doing DeLuca Foundation books? Off the record, I swallowed. Matteo said it was temporary. Dante's jaw shifted once. He looked away first. That should not have mattered. It did. The library doors opened. Gianni entered carrying a breakfast tray in one hand and a protein shake the color of punishment in the other. I bring coffee, eggs, and disappointment, he announced. The disappointment is mine. Marta found my emergency biscotti. Emergency biscotti? I repeated. He set the tray down with wounded dignity. Do not judge what you do not yet understand. Marta appeared behind him as if summoned by sacrilege. He hid them in the umbrella stand. It was tactical. It was stupid. Gianni looked at me. You see my life. Against my will, I laughed just once, a small fractured sound. Marta's eyes softened almost invisibly. Good, eat. She touched my shoulder on her way past, brief and practical. Not pitying, that nearly undid me. Dante stepped back from the desk to give me room, which only made me more aware of the restraint in it. He could have kept his ground. Men like him were accustomed to it. Instead, he yielded space with such precision it felt more intimate than crowding would have. I took coffee, black. My stomach objected, but the smell helped. Dante asked, did Matteo leave you anything else? No, the lie came too quickly. His eyes lifted. I hated how easily he read the body before the words. Before he could press, one of his men entered. Thick neck, gray suit, scar along his jaw. I had seen him the night before near the balcony doors. Aldo, Dante said. Aldo Conti nodded to me politely. Mrs. DeLuca, movement from Vitelli's side, he told Dante. Bellasia's men went to her apartment at 6. My coffee stopped halfway to my mouth. What? Aldo continued as if reporting weather. They left after finding it empty. I sat very still. Dante did not. He crossed to the window, phone already in hand. Any sign they found what they were looking for? Not yet, not yet. My pulse shifted into something thin and cold. What they were looking for, not me, or not only me. The thing hidden inside the false back of my late husband's desk drawer. The thing I had not told Dante about because I did not yet know if Matteo had trusted the right man, or if there had ever been a right man to trust. A black leather ledger, slim enough to disappear under a coat, coated enough to ruin the people who understood it. I had left it in a safety box 3 weeks ago. Only one other person knew. My cousin Alina. She had begged me to turn it over to authorities. I told her authorities in our world usually wore better suits and arrived sooner. Dante turned back from the window. You're pale, I'm tired. No, he said, you're thinking. Gianni went oddly quiet. Even Marta paused with a sugar bowl in her hand. I set the coffee down. If I knew something, why would I tell you? He came no closer. He didn't need to, because if Lorenzo's men went to your apartment at dawn, they weren't guessing anymore. That landed. I looked from Dante to Aldo to the library shelves, to the fire, to the untouched eggs slowly cooling beside Gianni's tragic shake. Matteo had once told me secrets did not become less dangerous just because you were grieving. Outside, tires crunched over gravel. Aldo's hand brushed the inside of his jacket. Dante's lighter clicked once in his pocket. Then one of the front guards shouted from the hall and every man in the house went still. Someone was already moving against us. By noon, I was in a private clinic on the Upper East Side surrounded by glass, polished stone, and enough discreet security to make the waiting room feel like a diplomatic incident. I did not want to be there. That was childish. I knew it. But wanting had become slippery since Matteo died. I wanted him back. I wanted my old apartment with its crooked kitchen drawer. I wanted a body that could carry grief without also carrying responsibility for another heartbeat. Instead, I had Dante, and a medical appointment arranged without asking. I already had a doctor, I said for the third time as the elevator rose. Dante stood beside me, one hand in his coat pocket, the other loose at his side. Doctor. Lucia Ferrero knows this world. That's exactly the part I object to. Object later. I shot him a look. You are impossible. No, Gianni muttered from behind us. Impossible is Marta making baked ziti while I'm trying to lower my cholesterol. Dante did not even glance back. Why are you here? Because Aldo said you needed an extra car and because if I stayed home, Marta would emotionally blackmail me with Parmesan. The elevator doors opened on a private floor. Doctor. Lucia Ferrero met us herself. A slim woman in her 40s with clear eyes, dark hair pinned back, and the kind of composure only doctors and assassins wore well. Sophia, she said, touching my hand. I'm sorry about Matteo. I nodded, unable to make something sincere fit through my throat. Lucia's gaze went to Dante for only a second, but the history in that glance was enough to tell me she knew him too well for flattery. "Come," she said gently. "Let's see how stubborn this child is." The exam room was too bright. The paper sheet on the bed crackled under my hands. A screen glowed black beside me. Dante remained near the door until Lucia asked one practical question after another. Nausea, dizziness, bleeding, sleep, stress. At stress, Gianni made a face so theatrical I almost laughed again. Lucia gave him a look. "Out, I support women's health, you contaminate oxygen." He pressed a hand to his chest. Cruelty in a medical environment. When he left, muttering about laboring under oppression and protein deficiency, the room quieted. Dante stayed. I looked at him. "Must you be here for this too? If you want privacy, say so." That surprised me enough to leave me silent. Lucia noticed, of course she did. "You can stay," I said finally, and hated how uncertain it sounded. He inclined his head once and moved no closer. The gel was cold. I flinched. "Sorry," Lucia murmured. Then the speaker crackled and a rapid, impossible sound filled the room. I forgot to breathe. It did not sound human at first, too fast, too urgent, like a trapped bird beating itself against glass. My hand went to my mouth. Lucia's voice softened. "That's your baby." Tears came before I understood them, not dramatic, not pretty, just sudden heat spilling sideways into my hair. I had seen lines on a test. I had been sick. I had counted weeks alone in bed with Matteo's shirt still hanging in the closet. But this sound made the life inside me indecently real. I turned my head without meaning to. Dante was looking at the monitor as if it had struck him. He did not move, but something in his face emptied out, not weakness. Worse. A silence so deep it seemed to swallow the whole room. Lucia glanced at him once and then very deliberately looked back at the screen. There, in that tiny professional mercy, I understood two things at once. She knew something about him I did not, and whatever it was had to do with this. When the scan ended, Lucia handed me tissues and began explaining measurements, fetal growth, blood pressure, iron. I tried to listen. Dante did, every word. He asked exactly 3 questions. Nutritional risk, stress levels, travel restriction. His voice never changed. But when Lucia mentioned hospital contingency planning in the event of early labor, the silver cup holding cotton swabs on the counter rattled. Dante had gripped the edge hard enough to shake it. Only once, only that. He released it immediately. I stared at his hand. Long fingers, scar across the knuckle of the smallest finger, pale and old. Control returning one tendon at a time, and almost. A crack sealed before anyone else could see it. Lucia finished and left to print images. The door shut softly behind her. For a moment it was only us. Bright room, cooling gel. The faint medicinal scent of alcohol and paper, my heart still racing around the echo of that tiny impossible sound. Dante looked at the monitor, now dark. "Did Matteo know?" he asked. I swallowed. "No, I found out 2 days after he died." His jaw tightened. "And you told no one? No one I trusted." That reached him. I saw it, not because he reacted, because he didn't. He stepped closer to the bed then and held out a folded towel. I took it, our fingers brushed. Heat flared up my wrist, another almost. He should have stepped back, he didn't. My hand was still on my abdomen, sticky with gel. He looked at it, and for one suspended second I thought he might touch me there, over the child, over the grief, over all the things we had no language for. Instead he stopped himself. The restraint in that pause made my pulse stumble harder than contact would have. "Lucia will send vitamins to the house," he said, the house, as if I lived there already. Before I could answer, the door opened again and Lucia came back with a strip of glossy images in her hand. She gave them to me first. I looked down at the grainy black and white curve of a life I had not yet earned the right words for, and my chest tightened so suddenly it hurt. Matteo would never see this. That fact did not arrive like grief anymore. It arrived like weather, predictable, merciless, already inside the room before I noticed the temperature drop. "You're measuring a little low on iron," Lucia said, gentler than before. "Nothing alarming. You need food, rest, and fewer men making decisions over your pulse." Gianni from somewhere in the hall called, "Doctor, if you're taking requests." "I also need fewer women policing my carbohydrates." "Then die younger," Marta's voice snapped back from farther away. Even Lucia smiled. Dante didn't. He was still watching the photograph in my hand, not greedily, not sentimentally. The way a man might watch a lit candle in a chapel after surviving something he could not name. Lucia's expression changed. "We're finished here." Dante, 1 minute. He stayed when she led him to the far corner of the room. They did not lower their voices enough. Maybe she knew I was listening, maybe she wanted me to. "Your blood pressure is the problem, not hers," Lucia said quietly. "You look like you've been holding your breath since the monitor turned on. It passed." "That is not what I'm talking about." A pause. Then Dante said, "I know." I stared at the ultrasound print in my hand and pretended I had not heard anything at all. Outside the clinic, winter had sharpened. The air sliced cleanly through the coat Marta had forced on me. A black SUV idled at the curb. Gianni stood beside it with his shoulders hunched against the cold and a paper cup of espresso in each hand. "One for me," he said, lifting one cup. "One for my grief." "Guess which one has sugar?" Marta slapped the back of his head as she passed him. "Both." He looked offended. "I'm trying to heal." Dante opened the rear passenger door for me. That should not have mattered. It did, not because he was gentle, because he was not pretending to be. His courtesy had nothing soft in it. It was the disciplined kind, the kind men used when softness would reveal too much. I bent to get in. The first shot cracked from across the street. Glass exploded. Someone shouted. Dante moved before my mind understood the sound. He drove me down behind the SUV door with one arm across my shoulders, his body covering mine, all clean lines and sudden violence. Another shot hit metal high above us. Sparks spat across black paint. "Down," he said as if there were anywhere else to go. My palms hit the pavement. Freezing grit bit my skin. Gianni was yelling into a radio. Marta cursed in Italian with a fluency that sounded inherited from saints and criminals alike. Dante drew his gun and fired twice over the hood, not wildly. Not angrily, efficiently. It was worse than rage, worse than shouting. He did not become a different man with a weapon in his hand. He became more exactly himself. A body fell near the curb across the street. Another man vanished behind a parked car. Tires screamed. One of Dante's security men ran hard around the clinic corner, blood on his sleeve. "Secondary," he barked. Dante shoved the rear door wider. Inside. I couldn't move, not because I was brave, because fear had reached that cold, useless stage where it no longer rushed, it locked. His hand closed around the back of my neck, not rough, final. "Sophia." That voice did what panic couldn't. It found me. I climbed in, half fell. The ultrasound images crumpled in my fist. Dante got in after me and slammed the door just as another shot struck the opposite side. Gianni launched the SUV into traffic so violently I hit the seat and gasped. "In my defense," he said, white-knuckled at the wheel, "this is exactly why I hate Manhattan parking." "Drive," Dante said. "I am driving, boss." I'm also praying, multitasking, and reconsidering all cured meats. My breathing came fast and wrong, too shallow, too thin. I tried to unclench my hand and found my fingers wouldn't obey. Dante noticed immediately. Of course he did. He took the ruined ultrasound print from my grip before I tore it clean through. "It's all right," he said. It was. My whole body knew it was. The baby, the shots, the sound of the gun in his hand. The fact that he had folded himself over me without a second of hesitation, as if taking bullets between my body and the world had been the simplest decision he would make all day. Something warm touched my wrist. Blood. I looked up sharply. A thin red line ran from just below his hairline into his eyebrow where shattered glass had cut him. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing. It's on your face." He reached for it and stopped when I already had my hand there, my fingertips pressing the cut without permission, without thought. The inside of the car shrank instantly. His breath changed, not much, enough, and almost his eyes held mine, dark, controlled, cracking by one impossible fraction and sealing again. Gianni made a strangled sound at the front. "If anyone asks," I heroically did not look in the rearview mirror. Marta, beside him, said, "For once in your life, continue not looking." I should have taken my hand away. I didn't. Dante let me keep it there for exactly one heartbeat too long before he closed his fingers around my wrist, not to remove it, only to lower it carefully. "You have to stop shaking, little saint." "I can't." The truth humiliated me as soon as it left my mouth. His thumb, still around my wrist, pressed once against my pulse. I know, no comfort should have been allowed to sound like that. By the time we reached the house, the city had gone dark at the edges. Men opened gates before we fully slowed. Inside, the foyer lights were already on, the silence tight and waiting. Dante got out first, then turned back and offered his hand, not because I was weak. Because he had decided I would not stumble where his men could see. I took it. That was the first touch that changed everything. Not the clinic, not the blood, not the gunfire. The way he helped me stand as if my fear was something to shield, not witness. When we stepped inside, Aldo Conti was already there with 2 more guards and murder in his old soldier's eyes. "Vitelli sent street boys," he said. "A message, not a real hit." Dante's hand left mine. The loss of it shocked me. He looked at the smear of blood on my fingertips, then at Aldo. "No," Dante said softly, "he doesn't get to practice." The whole house heard him. That night, Marta made soup dense enough to count as an intervention and sat with me until I finished half of it. Not speaking, just existing in the chair opposite mine, knitting something cream-colored that might have been a baby blanket if I let myself be sentimental enough to ask. The kitchen was warm in a real way the rest of the house wasn't. copper pans, worn stone counters, garlic, rosemary, butter, a room designed to feed people regardless of whether they deserved it. "I'm not hungry," I said around the fourth spoonful. She snorted. "And Gianni says almonds are a meal people lie." I looked down at the soup. "You knew," I said quietly. "That you were pregnant," I nodded. "Last night, yes." She looped yarn once around a needle. "Not because you told me. Because women notice what men only think they notice first." That sounded so exactly true I nearly smiled. Instead I asked, "And you didn't say anything?" "It wasn't my secret." The answer sat in my chest longer than it should have. Outside the kitchen, the house moved in controlled currents. Men on radios, doors opening and shutting with that same heavy certainty. Somewhere upstairs, Gianni argued with someone about the medicinal value of olive oil in relation to pastry. Then Dante walked in and the room altered. No one announced him, they didn't need to. Marta didn't rise, I liked her more for that. He had changed shirts. The cut over his eyebrow had been cleaned and taped in a thin white strip that made him look, somehow, more dangerous rather than less. "There was a second attempt on your apartment," he said. I set the spoon down. "When?" "An hour ago." My stomach turned cold. "Did they find anything?" His eyes narrowed just enough. "So there was something to find." There it was. The silence I had been hiding behind finally ran out of floor. I reached into my coat pocket and put the small brass key on the table between us. Marta stopped knitting. Dante looked at the key, then at me. "What does it open?" "A safe deposit box in Midtown." His face did not change, which only made the pressure in the room worse. "I moved something there after Matteo died," I said. "A ledger, not foundation books exactly. Copies, roots, account structures. Names in code. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't know if you were the better kind of monster." I did not say that. I only held his gaze and let the answer live there. It landed anyway. He asked, "Does anyone else know?" "My cousin Alina." Marta muttered something fervent in Italian that sounded like a prayer performed at knife point. Dante took the key and rolled it once between his fingers. The silver lighter clicked open in his other hand, then shut again. Thought translated into sound. "Matteo gave this to you?" he asked. "No. I found it in his desk after the funeral with a note." My voice thinned on the last word. I hated that. Dante went very still. "What note?" I had the folded paper in my room. I knew every crease of it by memory now. 3 lines in Matteo's handwriting, hurried enough to make me feel his absence all over again. "If anything happens, don't trust the family board. The Palermo numbers are the hinge. If you have no one else, go to Dante." I stood so abruptly my chair scraped stone. "I'll get it." He caught my wrist before I could pass him. Another almost. Not charged this time, necessary, but my body didn't know how to separate them anymore. His hand loosened immediately. "I'll come with you." In my room, I went straight to the leather cosmetics pouch where I had hidden the note like something shameful. Dante stayed by the door, not watching the room, watching me. I handed him the paper. He read it once, then again. Nothing in his expression moved, but something in the air did. A private impact, a bruise blooming under skin. "You were going to tell me eventually," he said. I didn't know if it was a question. "I was going to tell someone when I knew who Matteo died trying to protect." And now, I looked at the note in his hand, at Matteo's slanted writing. At the man standing in front of me carrying my dead husband's name inside his silence like it weighed something. Now I think he already answered that. For the first time since the gala, Dante looked almost tired. He folded the note with impossible care and gave it back to me. "We get the ledger tonight." "Tonight? Yes, you were just shot at, which is why we stop reacting and start moving." I should have been afraid. Instead I heard myself say, "Then I'm coming." "No, it's my box, it's my problem now." Anger rose hot and clean. That's exactly what I'm tired of. Men deciding something belongs to them because danger touched it. A strange look crossed his face. Respect, maybe, or irritation at finding it. Before he could answer, a knock came at the half-open door. Aldo stood there, shoulders filling the frame, expression carved from old stone. "Garage in 10, he said to Dante. Then his gaze shifted to me. "Wear flat shoes, marble steps are bad enough, blood makes everything worse." There was no softness in him, but there was warning, something human. After he left, I asked, "Does he always sound like that?" "Like a funeral with opinions," Gianni said from the hall, appearing with 2 pistachio macarons hidden badly behind his back. "Yes." Marta materialized behind him and slapped both pastries out of his hand. He looked bereaved. "You hit me with nutrition in front of guests. I hit you with survival." He pressed his palm to his chest. "Sophia, tell them grief burns calories." Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. Full this time, short, startled, real. Dante looked at me, not at my mouth, not precisely, at the fact of the sound. That unsettled him more than bullets had. An hour later in the underground garage, Aldo handed me a small black pouch. Inside was a compact pistol. "I don't know how to use this," I said. "I know," he replied. Then, with the patience of a man teaching a child how not to die, he showed me the safety, the grip, the weight. No dramatics, no speeches about empowerment, just mechanics. Dante watched from beside the car. He didn't interrupt once. When I chambered and cleared it correctly on the second try, Aldo grunted approval. "That surprises you?" I asked Dante. "Yes, that's insulting. It wasn't meant to be," which was somehow worse. We drove downtown just before midnight, Gianni at the wheel, Aldo in front. Dante beside me in the back, one thigh a dangerous warmth inches from mine. The city had gone slick and metallic under freezing rain. Through the window, Midtown looked like it had been washed for the benefit of richer lies. "Here's the thing about crime," Gianni said conversationally. "No one budgets for parking." "Focus," Dante said. "I am focused. I'm focused on how little respect this city gives a man trying to commit a felony with excellent posture." The bank's night vault entrance opened after one coded call from a manager who did not ask questions because men in Dante's orbit did not pay for curiosity. My box was where I left it, so was the ledger, black leather, slim, quietly devastating. I took it out with both hands and felt the whole shape of my life change. On the way back to the elevator, Dante said, "You read it. Enough, then tell me the one thing you haven't said yet." The fluorescent hall reflected in the brass doors. My face looked paler than I felt. I looked at the ledger, then at him. "There's no way Lorenzo could have moved those Palermo accounts without someone inside your house telling him which routes you'd stop watching." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Dante's expression turned to stone, because betrayal had just shifted from possibility to shape. We didn't make it back to the house. At 12:43 a.m., the convoy was forced off FDR Drive by a jackknife delivery truck that appeared too fast and too perfectly to be an accident. Gianni swore with religious creativity. Aldo shouted into the radio. The SUV ahead of us veered, the one behind braked hard, then the tunnel lights went out. Only every third one stayed on, throwing the service lane into bands of yellow and black like old crime scene tape. "Out the side," Dante said. "What, now?" He already had my door open. The night outside smelled of oil, dirty water, and hot brakes. Dante's hand locked around my forearm and pulled me behind a concrete support just as gunfire ripped through the lane. Metal screamed. Gianni ducked behind the engine block with a pistol in one hand and a look of profound, personal offense on his face. "I'm too handsome for this," he yelled. Aldo fired twice toward the rear SUV. "You were never in danger there." The ledger was inside my coat. I could feel its edge against my ribs. Dante looked at me once. Fast, comprehensive, alive, bleeding, standing, good. Then he was gone from my side and moving into gunfire like he had been built for exactly that temperature of darkness. I had seen him armed before, at the clinic, across rooms. In stories other people told with lowered voices, this was different. No wasted motion, no shouted threats. He crossed space in clean, brutal decisions. A man lunged from behind a van with a knife, and Dante put a bullet through his throat before the blade cleared waist height. Another rushed the far lane and Dante pivoted, shot him in the knee, then the chest, because mercy in his world apparently meant making the second shot fast. I could not breathe around what I was seeing. The worst part was not that he was capable of it. It was that he was calm. Someone grabbed me from behind. I screamed and drove Aldo's compact pistol backward without aiming. The shot went wild, close enough to deafen me. The man cursed and yanked my arm harder. Then Dante was there. He hit the man once. Just once, a short, vicious strike under the jaw followed by the gun tucked beneath the ribs. The man dropped. Dante turned on me so fast I flinched. "Are you hit?" "No." He caught my chin, checking anyway. Blood, someone's, I didn't know whose, marked the underside of his wrist. "Did he touch your stomach?" The question came out colder than anything else he'd said. "No." A beat. Then gunfire flared again and he shoved me behind him with enough force to bruise later. "Stay down, little saint." There was nothing cold in the nickname now, it shook. I obeyed because the alternative was dying under fluorescent tunnel light, with Matteo's ledger cutting against my ribs and Dante's salvator bleeding in front of me. A car engine roared at the far end of the service lane. Men shouted in Italian. One of Dante's guards went down with a wet, choking sound that will probably live in me forever. Dante knelt beside me long enough to press a phone into my hand. "If I don't get back in 10 seconds, call Lucia, say port 7. "No." His gaze snapped to mine. "No," he repeated. I had never heard him sound like that, not louder, sharper, as if fear had finally found him a language. "You don't get to hand me instructions like a widow," I said, breath shaking. "Not again." Something split open in his face. Not control, something underneath it, something far worse. Then he leaned in so close I felt his breath against my cheek. "Then do exactly what I say and let me come back to argue." He stood and went. I don't know how long the shooting lasted after that. Seconds distort when terror gets inside the body. I remember concrete grit grinding into my knees. I remember Gianni swearing about custom tailoring while returning fire. I remember Aldo dragging a wounded guard by his jacket collar. I remember the ledger like a second spine inside my coat, and I remember the moment Dante came back, blood on his sleeve, face white under olive skin, mouth set in a line so hard it looked painful. Move, he said. We ran through a maintenance door into a service corridor that smelled like rust and standing water. Sirens were starting somewhere above us, late enough to be decorative. Dante kept one hand at the small of my back, guiding me down wet concrete steps while the other held his gun low and ready. The touch burned even through layers of wool and fear. At the bottom, in a locked pump room that throbbed with machinery, he finally stopped. I turned on him. You were going to leave me a location and a doctor's name. His chest rose once hard. If necessary, it isn't your decision to die for me. No, he said, it's my job. The words hit me with absurd force, not romantic, not even gentle, just absolute. I looked at the blood on his shirt. You're hurt, not badly, sit down. He almost refused, I saw it happen. Pride, control, habit, then he did something more dangerous, he listened. I guided him onto an overturned crate and pulled open his jacket with shaking fingers. The bullet had grazed his side, angry red, not deep, still enough to make my stomach drop. My hands were trembling too badly to help. I can't, I started, you can. I'm shaking. I know, there it was again, not impatience, not mockery, witness. I pressed gauze from the emergency box to his side. He hissed once through his teeth. I'm sorry, don't be. The room was loud with pumps and water hammer, but somehow the silence between us grew louder. His hand closed around my wrist, not stopping me, steadying me, and almost. Then another, because when I looked up, his face was only inches away and neither of us moved back. I should be afraid of you, I whispered. His thumb shifted once against my pulse. You should, I'm not. The confession came out broken, costly, true, that's the part I don't know what to do with. Something in him gave, not all the way, just enough. He touched my cheek with bloodless knuckles as if I were something injured he feared mishandling. Then his mouth lowered to mine, not hungry, not claiming. Hesitant in a way I would never have believed possible of him. The kiss lasted one breath, maybe two. It was the opposite of everything I had seen him do with violence. Careful, arrested. Like he could still stop if I flinched, so of course I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was, and that was all the answer he took. When he drew back, his forehead rested briefly against mine. He did not say he wanted me. He said very quietly, at the gala you were shaking hard enough to spill champagne, and you still caught that boy's tray before your own body. I stared at him. No one in my world does that, he said, not first. My breath snagged, there it was, the truth I had felt from him before I understood it. Why her, why me? He closed his eyes once, brief and brutal. Dante, he had known it at the staircase. Not her face, not her grief, not the child she was trying to hide with a liar's stillness and a widow's black silk. The boy, the tray. The way she protected the weakest thing in reach while her own hands shook. Bianca had done that once in a winter market with a child she didn't know. Dante had buried both memory and sister badly, and Sophia had brought them back with a single impossible reflex. Sophia, when he opened his eyes again, the room felt altered beyond repair. A radio crackled in the corridor. Aldo's voice, Gianni's after it, strained but alive, movement, orders, the scrape of a bolt. Dante stood, every line of him tightening back into function. War, he said. I knew he did not mean the tunnel. I looked at the blood on my hands, his blood this time, and understood the same thing, it had arrived. War in Dante's world did not look dramatic at first, it looked administrative. More guards at the gates, 2 extra cars in every convoy, phones that never stopped lighting up. Men eating standing up in hallways with guns pressed into the backs of their belts. A map of the city spread across the library desk with dock routes, real estate holdings, churches, judges, cousins, and funeral homes all reduced to points of leverage. It looked like the household had stopped pretending anything outside those walls was normal. 3 days after the tunnel ambush, Gianni took a bullet through the shoulder bringing in supplies from the Bronx. He survived. That did not make the blood on Dante's front steps less red. I was in the kitchen with Marta rolling orange zest between my fingers, pretending the smell could keep nausea and dread from becoming the same thing, when the shouting started. Men ran through the hall, a car door slammed, someone yelled for towels, then Lucia, then clear space. I reached the foyer just as Gianni stumbled in between 2 guards, pale as flour and still talking. If anyone tells Marta I bled on the imported rug, he said through clenched teeth, I want it noted I died with manners. You're not dying, I snapped. Already pressing both hands over the soaked suit at his shoulder because no one else was close enough yet. He looked at me dazed and brave and absurdly offended. That is excellent news, I had plans. Lucia arrived at a run and pushed me back. Dante came in behind her, his suit blacker than grief, his expression stripped clean of anything human I could safely read. "Where?" he asked. "Delivery van on Amsterdam," one guard answered. "Street boys and one professional." A message again. No, a progression. Gianni caught my wrist as Lucia worked. "Tell Marta," he whispered, eyes unfocused, "if I die, bury me thin." "You're not dying," I repeated, and this time my voice cracked. His mouth twitched. "Then tell her I suffered beautifully." Lucia got him stable enough to move. They took him downstairs to the medical room. Marta followed, muttering prayers that sounded too angry to be addressed to God. I stayed in the foyer with Gianni's blood drying cold across my hands, while Dante stood 10 feet away talking about retaliation in a voice so level it made the chandeliers seem vulgar. When he finished, he looked at my hands. His face changed, only a little but enough. "Go wash that off," he said. I wanted to scream at him for how gentle it sounded. Instead I said, "This is what being near you costs." The silence that followed was not surprised, which somehow hurt more. He crossed to me, slow, giving me time to move if I wanted to. I didn't. "That is why you're leaving tonight," he said, my head lifted. "What?" "Alina is taking you to the airfield in White Plains. Lucia goes with you. There's a house in Montreal under another name. You stay there until this ends." No, this time there was no room in the word for negotiation. Dante's jaw hardened. "Gianni was hit because my men are guarding doors that should not matter to anyone except you. He was hit because Lorenzo wants to scare you, and he succeeded." The admission landed like a blow. I stared at him. He looked back at me with that same terrible calm, and I realized fear in him did not make him louder. It made him cleaner, colder, more precise. "I won't send him another reason," he said. Something in my chest folded in on itself. By evening, I was in the back seat again, different road, different sky, same armored silence. Lucia sat beside me with a medical bag on her lap. Alina drove ahead with Gianni's cousin in a decoy car because Dante trusted everyone only halfway now. I watched Manhattan thin into highways and warehouse lights and told myself I was doing the right thing. For the baby, for Gianni, for all the blood that had not yet dried on somebody else's floor. "You look like someone taking medicine she knows is necessary and still hates," Lucia said. I laughed once without humor. "Did he tell you to say that?" "No, Dante asks for outcomes, not dialogue." That annoyingly sounded true. The airport was small and private and violently clean. A jet waited on the dark tarmac with engines whispering. Alina hugged me too hard and then held my face in both hands the way my mother used to when she wanted truth. "Come with me," she said. "For once, Sophia, choose the life that still belongs to you." I looked past her shoulder at the plane, the easy answer, the sane one. But sanity had not been living in Dante's house while men bled under your roof because your child had become leverage. Sanity had not been watching a man built for violence stop himself over and over because you mattered more to him than what he wanted. Sanity had not been hearing your dead husband's last note tell you exactly whose door to choose when the world broke. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the attached audio file from Matteo's old encrypted account. My hands shook as I played it. Static, breath, then my husband's voice, rougher than I had ever heard it. "Soph, if you're hearing this, I was too late or too stupid or both. A swallow, distant traffic. Listen to me carefully. If the Palermo numbers come apart, Lorenzo won't stop at me. He'll go through wives, babies, priests, anyone who can be turned into pressure. If I can't get back to you, go to Dante, not because he's good. Because he still knows the difference between power and cruelty. That difference is all that's left." The file ended. I think Alina said my name, I'm not sure. Because all at once, I could see the shape of the choice clearly enough to hate it. Get on the plane, keep some smaller version of myself alive, and let other people finish a war that had already entered my body. Or go back with open eyes and become someone my old life would never fully forgive. Lucia read my face before I spoke. "You decided?" "Yes." Alina stepped back as if I had slapped her. "Don't," my throat burned. "If I leave now, he'll still fight. Gianni will still blade. Lorenzo will still come after this child if Dante loses. The only difference is I'll be gone when it happens. That is not your responsibility." "No," I whispered, "but it is my life." Tears rose in Alina's eyes, furious and helpless. "If you go back, nothing will ever be simple again." I almost said nothing had been simple since Matteo's body came home. Instead, I said the thing that cost more. "I know." She let go of me first. It felt like losing something clean. I turned before I could reconsider and walked back toward Lucia's car while the plane idled behind me like a future I was killing with my own hands. Lucia caught up at my shoulder. "You understand what you're choosing?" "Yes." "Then choose it all the way." By the time the gates of Dante's house opened again, the sky above them had gone the dark blue of bruises. Men moved at the entrance with sharpened purpose. No one expected me. Dante came into the foyer as I stepped inside, coat still on, gun at his back, war all over him. He stopped. For one rare, unguarded second, he looked stunned. I took off my gloves slowly, exposing the wedding ring I still had not removed and the hand that was no longer steady enough to hide it. I had a plane, I said. I didn't take it. His eyes held mine, dangerous, disbelieving, barely human with relief he would never call by its name. You should have, maybe, I swallowed. I came back anyway. The whole house went silent around us. I had seen exactly what his world cost, and I walked back in myself. After I came back, Dante stopped arguing with me and started using me. Not recklessly, not as bait, more dangerously than that. As a partner, the library became our war room. I spent hours bent over Matteo's ledger with Dante on one side of the desk and Aldo on the other, tracing shell entities through freight manifests, charitable fronts, and customs flags. The code wasn't random. Matteo had built it like music, just as I'd told Dante, repeated intervals, saints' names marking false clean funds, maritime policy numbers hiding weapon routes. Once I found the pattern, the whole thing began to loosen. Lorenzo had not just wanted port access. He had been buying judges through pediatric cancer donations and moving fentanyl through refrigerated aid trucks marked for parish food programs. When I said it aloud, Aldo closed his eyes briefly. Cruelty with paperwork, he said. Modern. That was the first time I thought maybe I trusted him. That was the problem. He had started showing up in the kitchen when Marta was baking and pretending he only wanted coffee. He told me which hallways in the house turned slick in winter. He adjusted the angle of a guard's holster when I passed too close. Once when I asked why he always sounded disappointed to still be alive, he answered, because surviving makes you attend meetings. I had smiled. I hated that memory later. On the fifth night after the airport, I found the final hinge in Matteo's code. Not Palermo, a chapel fund. St. Bridget Holdings, a fake endowment routed through a church restoration account in Red Hook. It mapped exactly to the warehouse Lorenzo had used for 3 vanished shipments and 1 missing accountant. We have him, I said, standing so fast the chair tipped backward. Dante came around the desk at once. Slow down, I'm fine, you're pale. I'm pregnant and solving organized crime, I snapped. Pale is part of the package. To my left, giant arm in a sling, standing purely because bed rest offended him, lifted his good hand. For the record, I support her tone. Marta shoved him back into a chair. Support your own blood pressure. Dante looked at the page, his lighter clicked once. If Lorenzo used church contracts, he'll have a secondary access point near consecrated property. Aldo nodded. Old chapel on Van Brunt. Service entrance behind the rectory. Dante turned to the room and orders moved outward instantly. It happened too fast after that for memory to sort cleanly. Cars, rain. The city turning slick and black beyond the window. I was not supposed to leave the house. I did anyway. Because the final notation in Matteo's ledger had an asterisk beside the chapel fund, and I recognized the symbol from something he once wrote in the margin of our grocery list when he wanted me to remember an urgent errand. See physically, not call, not transfer. See, Dante should have refused me. Instead, he made me wear a vest under my coat and put me in the middle car with Aldo. That should have warned me. At the chapel, the rain smelled like rust-off old brick. Candles flickered through stained glass. Somewhere nearby, harbor foghorns sounded low and mournful over the water. Dante moved ahead with 6 men. Aldo stayed with me beneath the side portico. Wait here, he said. I'm tired of waiting in doorways. Then consider this tactical resentment. The chapel door opened from inside, not by Dante, by Vittorio Bellacia. He smiled when he saw me. The world narrowed instantly. Before I could speak, Aldo's hand closed around my arm. Too hard, I turned, already knowing before my mind finished catching up. His face had not changed at all. Forgive me, he said. I don't think I will ever hear those 2 words again without wanting to be sick. I twisted hard enough to wrench my shoulder. Aldo, don't fight, he said quietly. You'll fall, he was right. The wet stone under my shoes slid. Vittorio stepped closer, pleased with himself in a way Dante never would have been. Lorenzo only wants a conversation, he said. That's what weak men call leverage, I spat. He laughed. Aldo disarmed me with almost paternal efficiency, removed the pistol from inside my coat and handed it over. The betrayal was so intimate it felt obscene. Inside the chapel, voices erupted. Gunfire, muffled then sharp, broke against old walls. Dante had gone through the front, we were going through the side. No, I was being taken through the side by a man I had begun to trust, because he had noticed where the floors turned slick in winter and sounded tired when he told me to be careful. Vittorio shoved me toward a narrow passage behind the altar. Move, I dug in once, useless. Aldo leaned close enough that only I heard him. If you can keep him talking, he murmured, do it. I stared at him. That was when the second betrayal cut deeper than the first, because regret in his voice did not make him innocent. The passage opened into a basement room under the chapel, stone-walled and damp with old salt air. Lorenzo Vitelli waited beside a table laid out with Matteo's copied ledgers, photographs of port facilities, and one silver crucifix turned face-down like a threat to heaven. He was older than Dante by maybe 15 years and carried grief the wrong way, displayed nowhere, leaking everywhere. Beautiful suit, dead eyes. The kind of man who had mistaken ruthlessness for intelligence so long he no longer remembered the difference. When he saw my abdomen, hidden but no longer deniable, his mouth softened. That frightened me more than anger would have. So, he said, the rumor was true. I pressed my hand over the ledger mark inside my coat as if it could still protect anything. Matteo always did make his mistakes sentimental. You killed him. I punished him, Lorenzo corrected. There it was, the mirror, a man who believed cruelty was just power stripped of weakness. He circled me slowly, hands behind his back, never raising his voice. Do you know what Dante is, Sophia? He's a man who still thinks lines exist. I used to admire that. It made him almost noble. Upstairs, another shot cracked through the floorboards. I remembered Aldo's whisper, keep him talking. So I looked Lorenzo in the face and asked, and what are you? He smiled without warmth. What happens after enough funerals? The answer chilled me because I believed it. I also understood then what Dante might still fear becoming. Lorenzo reached for the edge of my coat. The child comes with lineage problems. I stepped back, hard. Touch me, I said, voice shaking but not breaking, and Dante won't leave enough of you to bury. His smile widened, the basement door slammed open, Vittorio turned, Aldo entered first. And the gun in his hand was pointed at Lorenzo. No one moved, not me, not Vittorio, not Lorenzo. Aldo's face looked older than I had ever seen it. I told you, he said to Lorenzo almost sadly, not to make me choose twice. Then Vittorio reached for his weapon and everything went to hell. Vittorio got the shot off first. It hit Aldo low in the abdomen and spun him sideways into the stone wall. His gun discharged into the ceiling. Dust and plaster rained down. Lorenzo swore once, clean and furious, and grabbed me by the back of my coat hard enough to wrench my neck. I drove my elbow backward. Connected with bone, not enough. Vittorio lunged again. Aldo, already folding around blood, shot him through the mouth. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. Lorenzo dragged me through a second door at the rear of the basement, down a service corridor that opened onto the harbor behind the chapel. Cold hit like punishment. Rain, salt, diesel. Somewhere in the dark, an engine idled. I stumbled on the slick boards of the loading platform and would have gone down if Lorenzo hadn't hauled me upright by sheer fury. Move, he said. The harbor beyond us was black glass hacked by orange reflections. Shipping cranes stood against the night like gallows. A warehouse number was stenciled on the corrugated wall to our left. 7. Port 7, my hand flew to the phone Dante had once pressed into my palm in the tunnel. Not there now, different coat. But I had eyes and memory, Port 7. If I stayed alive long enough, that might be enough. Lorenzo shoved me into the back office of the warehouse and locked the metal door. The room smelled of rope, wet cardboard, and stale cigarettes. One overhead bulb buzzed. There was a desk, a filing cabinet, and an old freight board with departure schedules half erased. I forced myself to look. Vessel codes, times. One number repeated across 2 columns under a fake produce company. St. Bridget Holdings again. Good, I thought wildly. Patterns meant traceability. Traceability meant time. Outside, men shouted. Boots hammered dock metal. Somewhere not far enough away, gunfire started again. I sank into the chair Lorenzo had shoved toward me because standing made the room tilt. He noticed and smiled. Sit, he said. It would be unfortunate if Dante received damaged goods. I almost laughed at the phrase, almost vomited. He poured himself whiskey from a hidden bottle and didn't offer me any. Of course he didn't. Men like him preferred their cruelty unadorned. You think he'll come? I said. He always comes. The way he said it told me this wasn't about me, not fully. This was older, wounded in another direction. What did he take from you? I asked. Lorenzo's gaze sharpened. There. A seam? He made me wait, he said after a moment. When my son was bleeding out in Naples, Dante held a port because he wanted one of my ships searched. 20 minutes, that is all. My boy died before the road cleared. I stared. I had not expected pain. That was my mistake. And Bianca? I asked before I could stop myself. I didn't know how I knew her name belonged here. Maybe Lucia's look in the clinic. Maybe the way Dante had gone silent at the heartbeat. Lorenzo's mouth flattened. Collateral, he said. Revulsion moved through me so fast it steadied me better than courage would have. No, I thought, not mirror. Warning, he saw it in my face and smiled thinly. There it is. The saintly judgment. I thought of Dante in the tunnel, in the clinic, in the library. A man who carried lines inside him even when they cost him blood. A man who could kill and still stop himself from becoming this. Footsteps pounded outside the office. Lorenzo moved to the side of the door, gun raised. I looked at the freight board again. Repeated vessel code, departure at 03:15. If Dante got the warehouse but not Lorenzo, the route mattered. I grabbed the marker from the desk and drew a single line through the code number on the board, not writing a message, marking a pattern, something Dante would notice because he noticed everything. The office door blew inward. Dante entered on the recoil of the second shot. The rest happened too fast for sequence and too slow for mercy. He fired once toward the left, once lower. Lorenzo caught my arm and yanked me in front of him. Dante stopped himself mid-second angle rather than risk me. That hesitation cost him. Lorenzo's bullet skimmed his shoulder and threw him back against the frame. I screamed his name. That was apparently all the opening Gianni needed. He appeared behind Dante, one arm still in a sling, other hand holding a shotgun like a personal grievance. I am medically underqualified for this, he announced, and fired into the overhead light. Darkness, shouting, muzzle flashes. I bit Lorenzo's hand and drove my heel backward into his shin with every ounce of spite and pregnancy and terror in me. He cursed. His grip slipped. I dropped hard and crawled toward the desk, away from the line of fire, hands over my abdomen. Then Dante was there. He hauled me against him with one arm while shooting with the other. Wordless. Wild only by his standards. I could feel his heart slamming through his shirt, feel blood hot at his shoulder, feel the whole savage shape of what he had become to get to me. The office filled with other men. Aldo's loyalists, Dante's guards, Lucia somewhere screaming for everyone who was shot to stay vertical until she arrived. Lorenzo disappeared through the rear dock door. Dante made to follow and I caught his jacket. He looked down at my hand fisted there. For 1 second neither of us said anything. Then he pressed his forehead to mine roughly, desperately, alive and breathed once. That was the reunion. No speeches, no vows, just proof. Gianni leaned in the doorway, gray-faced and triumphant. Before anyone praises my courage, I'd like it noted this was a terrible environment for shoulder recovery. Despite everything, I laughed and cried at the same time. His expression softened. There she is. Dante drew back enough to look at me, blood on his collar, rain at his temples, murder still in every line of him. Can you walk? Yes. It was a lie, he knew, he took it anyway. As we moved, his gaze caught the freight board, the single line I'd drawn through the repeated vessel code. He stopped, looked at me, understood. Container route, he said. I nodded. 3:15. That was when his face changed, not because I was alive, but because I had stayed useful while afraid. Because I had not broken into helplessness just because I had every right to. He kissed my forehead once, brief, burning, then he turned to Gianni. Lock the docks. Gianni straightened painfully. With pleasure and several future complaints. Outside, sirens multiplied over the harbor. Rain needled the dark. Somewhere beyond the cranes, Lorenzo was still breathing. Dante looked at the black water as if he could already see the last shape of the night. We end it before dawn, he said, and both of us knew one of us might not survive what came next. By 2:40 a.m., the docks had become a map of consequence. Blue lights flashed at the perimeter where bought officials pretended confusion for the benefit of paperwork. Inside, Dante's men moved in disciplined lines between stacks of shipping containers wet with rain. Port 7 opened toward the East River in steel corridors and blind corners, every surface echoing footsteps too far and gunfire too close. Lucia wanted to sedate me. I refused. Dante wanted me in the command vehicle with guards and locked doors. I refused that too. So he compromised by putting me with Gianni in a loading office overlooking the container yard, while he and the strike team moved below. Gianni had a fresh dressing on his shoulder, a pistol at his hip, and a protein bar in his hand he looked at with aristocratic disgust. If I die eating flax, he said, please tell Marta I deserved better. You're not dying. Yes, well. We've all been very wrong before. Through the rain-streaked glass, forklifts sat abandoned like heavy animals at rest. Beyond them, container 315 stood half open. The freight code I'd marked in Lorenzo's office. Dante's voice came over the radio, clipped and low. Positions. Men answered from 3 directions. Then a second voice crackled across the channel. Aldo alive, south lane clear, he said, breath rough. I've got visual on Lorenzo, Gianni swore softly. Old bastard. I gripped the edge of the desk. He lived, refuses to die out of spite, Gianni said. I respect it professionally. I looked through the glass as Aldo emerged between 2 container rows below, one hand pressed to his bandaged side, gun low. Shoulders set like a man carrying his own verdict to the altar. Dante stepped into view opposite him. Rain soaked both of them instantly. They looked at each other across 15 yards of steel and old history. The radio hissed, but neither man used it. I couldn't hear the first words through the glass. I only saw Aldo's mouth move. saw Dante's stillness sharpen, saw the slight turn of Aldo's head toward container 315. Gianni beside me had gone abruptly quiet. He sold Bianca's route, he said. I turned. What? His face looked older than I had ever seen it. Years ago. Lorenzo had Aldo's son on a heroin charge in Naples. Aldo gave him the road Bianca was taking to Lucia's clinic. Thought Lorenzo would scare Dante, not block the ambulance. He swallowed. His boy still overdosed 2 months later. The world tilted. That's why Dante kept him, because he knew and couldn't decide whether mercy was weakness or punishment. Below us, Lorenzo appeared at the container threshold with 2 men and a rifle. Everything broke at once. Gunfire ripped the yard open. Dante shoved Aldo sideways an instant before the rifle round hit the steel behind him. Men fired from the east lane. One of Lorenzo's guards went down. Another vanished behind a crate stack. Aldo used the container wheel well as cover, then rose and shot one of Lorenzo's men clean through the chest. Dante moved low and fast toward the open container. Stay here, Gianni said. I was already at the door. The rain outside hit like needles. I ran anyway, one hand braced under my coat, the other holding the small backup pistol Aldo had taught me to clear in Dante's garage. Somewhere behind me, Gianni shouted something about liability and orthopedic collapse. Inside container 315, pallets had been pushed aside to reveal folding tables, shipping ledgers, cash bricks, and a satellite phone still lit. Evidence. Enough to ruin judges, priests, and half the boardrooms in Lower Manhattan. Lorenzo saw me first. That was his mistake. He pivoted, gun lifting toward my center mass, and in that fraction of time, Dante had to choose between the clean shot at Lorenzo's throat and the shot that might save me if he was half a second late. He chose me, of course he did. He crossed the distance like impact itself and drove me behind a steel pallet rack as Lorenzo fired. The shot tore sparks from the container wall above where my head had been. Dante returned fire, missed clean because he was shielding me with his body. Stay down, he snapped. Then Aldo came in through the side. Bleeding, gray, determined. Lorenzo looked from one man to the other and smiled like a priest about to ruin a confession. Still choosing for women and children, Dante, that's what gets them buried. Aldo answered before Dante could. No, he said, raising his gun with both shaking hands. Men like us do. Lorenzo turned. Aldo shot him once in the spine. It did not kill him, it dropped him to his knees. For a moment, no one moved except rain dripping through a bullet hole high in the container roof. Lorenzo tried to twist toward his weapon. Dante kicked it away. Aldo swayed where he stood. Blood darkened the front of his shirt faster than rain could wash it. His eyes found Dante's. I chose wrong twice, he said. Dante's face was unreadable. Aldo gave one broken laugh. Don't make a religion of hating me, waste of architecture. Then his knees buckled. I lunged instinctively, but Dante caught me back with one arm and took Aldo's weight with the other, lowering the older man to the container floor with an intimacy that hurt to witness. Aldo looked once at me. You should have stayed on the plane. Probably, I whispered. That got the ghost of a smile from him. His gaze shifted back to Dante. You kept the line longer than I did. Then he died. Lorenzo, still on his knees, laughed wetly from somewhere below us. And what line is that? Dante stood. I had never been afraid of his silence more than I was then. He looked down at Lorenzo not with hatred, but with a kind of exhausted clarity. The terrible understanding of a man seeing the version of himself grief had been trying to build for years. No children, Dante said. No women. No excuses dressed as funerals. Lorenzo sneered blood onto the steel floor. That made you weak. Dante raised his gun. No, he said, it made me late. He fired once. Nothing after that felt triumphant. Lucia came running. Men flooded the yard. Gianni arrived clutching his shoulder and wheezing about unauthorized cardio. The rain kept falling. Aldo's body lay between cash bricks and church accounts and the wreckage of choices made long before I entered any of these rooms. Dante turned to me, not victorious, changed. I took his hand because he was still standing, and I suddenly understood that standing was costing him more than blood. Outside, dawn had begun to gray the river. Behind us, Lorenzo Vitelli's empire drowned in evidence and rain. In front of us, nothing was clean, but it was finished. It is over. War ended the way storms did in the city. Not when the clouds stopped. When people started pretending the damage had always belonged there. 2 funerals were held within 4 days. Lorenzo Vitelli's body disappeared into legal denials, sealed affidavits, and family statements written by men who had already begun dividing his absence like property. Aldo Conti was buried quietly, before noon, in a cemetery in Queens under a gray sky that seemed unwilling to make anything beautiful for him. Gianni wore a black suit that strained at the shoulders and a face like indigestion at the concept of mortality. He owed me $50, he said at the graveside, voice low enough to be private and loud enough to be heard. I'd like the Lord to note the debt remains active. Marta closed her eyes briefly. You are impossible. No, Marta, impossible is closure. I am grieving with structure. I laughed then, softly and against my will, and Gianni glanced at me with something relieved in his expression before he turned back toward the grave. Dante did not speak during the burial. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his dark coat and his face arranged into that same disciplined stillness I had once mistaken for emptiness. I knew better now. Stillness in him was never absence. It was pressure held behind bone. When the service ended, everyone began moving back toward the cars over wet winter grass. I stayed 1 second longer, looking down at the fresh earth and thinking about the impossible geometry of a man who had betrayed the person he loved most, spent years living inside the cost, and still chosen, at the end, to point his gun in the right direction. I felt Dante stop beside me before I looked at him. He taught me to shoot, he said. The words came without preamble. That alone made them feel expensive. I turned my face toward his profile. I know, he also taught me how to lose at cards on purpose when a man's pride mattered more than the money. Something in my chest tightened. That sounds useful. It was a pause. He was better at both than I was. I waited. Rain tapped quietly against nearby headstones. In the distance, a truck changed gears on the avenue beyond the cemetery wall. When Bianca was dying, Dante said, eyes still on the grave, I thought if I kept driving, if I got to Lucia fast enough, time would be forced to obey me. I remember the windshield more clearly than her face. That's the part I hate. I did not interrupt him. Some silences were bridges. Speaking too soon broke the boards. I have spent years deciding whether hating Aldo was loyalty to my sister, he said, or cowardice because hating him was easier than grieving her. His voice never rose, it never even roughened. But I heard the fracture anyway. I slipped my hand into his coat pocket and found his fist there, closed hard enough to ache. He looked at me then, not startled, just arrested. I opened his fingers one at a time and held his hand in the dark wool pocket where no one could see it. The intimacy of that nearly made me cry. You don't have to choose one pain to make the other legitimate, I said quietly. His mouth shifted by a fraction, not a smile, something older and sadder. You always say things like that when I'm least armed for them. That sounds like a you problem. There it was, a real smile this time, brief, almost invisible, still enough to alter the whole day. By the time we returned to the house, the kind of rebuilding that follows violence had already begun. Lawyers in the library, new security rotations at the gates. Men repainting over bullet damage in the underground garage, as if drywall could erase memory. Lucia had forbidden me from doing anything strenuous, which apparently included standing too long, carrying groceries, or lifting my own books. And Marta enforced this with the pitiless joy of a woman who had finally found a rule she could use against everyone. I am pregnant, not porcelain, I said from the kitchen doorway that evening. And yet, Marta replied, kneading bread with righteous force, one of those conditions ends in shattering if mishandled. Gianni, seated at the table with a bowl of lentil soup and a look of profound betrayal, lifted his spoon. I would like the record to show I am also being oppressed. You're eating, I'm eating punishment. You were shot. In the shoulder, Marta. Not in the soul. She set a plate of warm rosemary focaccia in front of me and took his soup away. He made a wounded sound. Fascism. I sat slowly, one hand at the underside of my belly where the baby had started announcing its existence with indignant little kicks whenever I forgot to rest. The bread smelled like olive oil, salt, and something steadier than happiness. I tore off a piece and watched steam escape. That was when I understood what had been changing in me for weeks. In the beginning, every kindness in this house had felt temporary, tactical, like being sheltered under a roof held up by men with guns. Now the warmth reached me before the fear did. That realization should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like admitting thirst. Dante came in late, carrying rain and cold with him. The room changed around him the way it always did, but the difference now was that I no longer mistook change for danger alone. Sometimes it was simply attention narrowing toward the place where I sat. His eyes found me first, then the bread, then Gianni, who was glaring at the empty space where his soup had once been. What happened? Dante asked. Marta's a tyrant, Gianni said. Marta pointed at him with the bread knife. He tried to bribe Lucia for permission to eat prosciutto. I offered gratitude, not money. You offered theater tickets. Gianni looked at me for sympathy and found none. I live among enemies. Dante removed his coat and handed it to a waiting guard before crossing the kitchen. He stopped by my chair and touched the back of his fingers once lightly against my cheek. Not to check, not to possess, just because he had come in from the cold and I was there. That tiny ordinary gesture undid me more thoroughly than the kiss in the tunnel ever had. How was the board meeting? I asked. Predictable. His hand dropped to the chair back behind me. Half of them discovered morality as soon as Lorenzo stopped breathing. That's very efficient of them. I fired 3, Gianni sighed. Dear Lord, thank you for not letting the boss kill anyone today, that we know of. Dante looked at him. You're alive, don't push your miracle. After dinner, the house quieted early. Rain deepened against the windows. One by one, the downstairs lights went dim until only the library and the small lamp near the chapel hall remained. I found Dante there in the library, not working. That by itself felt unusual enough to make me stop in the doorway. He stood by the window with his silver lighter in one hand, clicking it open and shut without flame. A habit now familiar enough that I knew the rhythm of his thinking by sound alone. Soft metallic click, pause, click. He looked over when I entered. You should be asleep. I should do many things. Yet here I am. His gaze dropped to the front of my robe, where the baby had turned me unmistakably into a woman on the threshold of becoming someone else's mother. Something warm and unguarded crossed his face before restraint returned to cover it. Come here, he said. I went. That was what had changed most of all. The fact that going to him no longer felt like surrender. When I stopped in front of him, he put the lighter down on the table beside a stack of ledgers and reached into his jacket pocket. For one absurd second I thought gun, habit, fear, memory. Instead he withdrew a small velvet box and held it in his palm between us. I stared. No, I said immediately, one dark eyebrow lifted. No, you are absolutely not getting on one knee after surviving a harbor war. A slow exhale escaped him, almost a laugh. That wasn't the plan. Good, he opened the box. Inside was not a diamond in a theatrical nest. It was a ring of old gold, worn smooth on the inside with a single small emerald set low in the band. Practical, intimate. The sort of ring meant to be lived in, not displayed. It was my mother's, he said. The room seemed to draw in around the words. Dante, listen first, so I did. I have houses, accounts, lawyers, security, and men who answer before I finish a sentence, he said. None of that is what I'm offering you. His voice stayed low, economical. That made every word land harder. I'm offering you my name if you want it, my protection even if you don't, a home that won't always be peaceful but will always be honest about what it is. And a life where no one will ever decide your child is leverage while I'm still breathing. Tears came before I could stop them. I hated that I cried so often around him now. Or maybe I hated that I didn't hate it enough. He looked at the tears and kept going anyway. I am not asking for Matteo to disappear, he said quietly. Or for the part of you that loved him to become convenient for me. I'm asking whether, after everything, you want what comes next to be with me. I should have answered immediately. Instead, I looked at the ring, then at his hand holding it, then at the man who had built his whole life around control and was standing in front of me making an offer with no armor except truth. I don't know what kind of wife I would be in your world, I whispered. His gaze held mine, steady, devastatingly so. Then be mine in the only way I care about, he said. Honestly, that broke whatever was left of me. I laughed through tears. That's a terrible line. It worked. I took the ring from the box with shaking fingers. Yes, I said. He went very still. I slipped it onto my right hand because the wedding ring still lived on the left, and this, somehow, felt right. Past and future not replacing each other, only learning to stand in the same room. Dante's hand rose to my face, stopped once halfway as if old restraint still required acknowledgement, then settled against my cheek. Little saint, he said, no mockery. No possession sharpened into warning, only wonder and something that had already become home. Later, long after the house slept, we stood together in the nursery Marta had begun arranging as if she could intimidate the future into softness. Pale walls, a carved wooden cradle by the window. One small lamp glowing gold in the corner. Dante rested his hand low against my back. I leaned into him. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Inside, for one quiet, almost ordinary moment, nothing needed saving. 9 months after the gala, the house sounded different. Less like waiting, more like living. That was not the same thing as safe. Dante's world would never become safe in the way children's books promise safety, with fences and certainty and villains neatly dead before dinner. There were still guards at the gates. Still cars checked at the end of the drive. Still men who lowered their voices when he entered a room and lawyers who smiled like polished threats. But there was also a bassinet in our bedroom for the nights our daughter refused to honor anyone's sleep. There were tiny socks drying on the kitchen rack because Marta believed the laundry room lacked sunlight and dignity. There was Gianni carrying the baby around the house in one arm while lecturing her very seriously about the historical abuse of healthy cuisine. Your father, he told her one afternoon, respects discipline but does not understand marinara as a spiritual force. From the stove, Marta said, "If you drip sauce on that child, I will bury you upright." Gianni kissed the top of my daughter's head. "You hear that, Lucia Rosa? This is not a home, it is an autocracy." Lucia Rosa made a bubbling sound that could have meant anything and probably meant milk. I sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of bitter chocolate cooling in front of me and a spoon stained with rose cream in my hand. My daughter's carrier rested beside my chair, one tiny fist curled against the blanket near her face. Outside, late spring laid gold over the garden walls. The first party Dante had allowed at the house since Lorenzo's death moved through the lawn in low music and cautious laughter. A christening lunch, Lucia insisted. A political statement, Gianni called it. A reason to wear linen and suffer, according to Dante. I called it survival with flowers. "You're making dessert for 40 people, Marta said, looking at the bowls on the counter. "That is not rest. It's assembly," I said. Different crime. The dessert had come to me 3 nights ago during the baby's second feeding, because apparently motherhood had not cured me of thinking in flavor. Bitter chocolate base. Rose cream in the center. Thin caramel shell on top that would crack under the spoon with a sound as delicate as a promise breaking. I had not meant it as metaphor, that was the problem. The truest things rarely announce themselves as symbols before becoming confession. Gianni peered into the mixing bowl and sighed tragically. "If I ask nicely, will childbirth exempt me from my diet too?" "You did not give birth," Marta said. I suffered emotionally in the waiting room. "You ate vending machine nougat in the waiting room. It was medicinal." I laughed and transferred cream into a piping bag while Lucia Rosa slept through. The argument with the calm superiority of infants. Dictators and house cats. A tray of crystal coops sat ready near the window. I began filling them one by one, steady hand, measured pressure, the sort of work that demanded enough attention to silence the rest of the mind. That was why Matteo had first taught me ledgers, I realized now, not because I was useful, because precision had always soothed me. Numbers then, sugar now, structure as prayer. The back door opened. I heard the soft metallic click before I looked up. Dante, silver lighter in one hand, unlit cigar in the other. He never smoked near the baby. He mostly forgot to smoke it all these days. But he still carried the lighter, and the small sound of it had become threaded through my life so completely that my body recognized him by metal before scent. He stood in the doorway watching me. Blue-gray suit, no tie, sun at his shoulders. A scar still faint at the brow from the clinic shooting and another, whiter one under his shirt that only I knew how to touch carefully in the dark. "You're hiding in my kitchen," I said. "It's your kitchen." I looked at him over the piping bag. That sounded dangerously domestic. "I have survived worse." Gianni, without missing a beat, handed him the baby. "Take your daughter before Marta decides I've breathed on her incorrectly." Dante took Lucia Rosa with a competence that never stopped moving me, not because it was surprising anymore. Because the most violent man I had ever known held our daughter as if gentleness were simply another form of vigilance. He came to stand beside me. "What is it?" he asked, looking at the dessert cups. "Bitter chocolate on the bottom," I said, still piping. "Rose cream in the middle, caramel shell on top." Gianni groaned softly. "I'm going to die before my doctor can stop me." Marta smacked his arm with a dish towel. "You'll die talking first." Dante's gaze stayed on the dessert. "What's it called?" I hesitated. Then, because truth had gotten expensive enough between us to be worth spending carefully, I said, "Second Life." His eyes lifted to mine. The kitchen seemed to narrow around that look. "Why?" he asked. I set the piping bag down. "Because it looks polished when it's finished, but the top breaks easily. The middle is softer than it should be. And the bitter part is what holds the whole thing together." Silence. Then Gianni whispered, with the reverence of a man witnessing a miracle and dessert simultaneously, "Madonna." Marta took the baby from Dante with suspicious tenderness. "Go," she told us both. "Before you make this room unbearable." Outside, the garden hummed with low conversation, cut grass, and the silver clink of glasses. Priests, lawyers, cousins. Men with guns at their backs pretending to be unarmed because there was a child in white lace on the lawn, and even this world understood ceremony when faced with innocence. Near the fountain, one of the catering boys emerged from the side path carrying a tray of champagne too large for his narrow shoulders. He couldn't have been more than 17. His left hand shook visibly. I saw it at the same moment he caught the edge of the gravel and the tray tipped. Without thinking, I moved. One hand went out to steady the silver. The other closed around his wrist before the glasses could slide. "It's all right," I said softly. "Blame me if anyone asks." The boy stared at me wide-eyed. Across the lawn, silence spread in a peculiar ripple I recognized instantly. Because Dante had seen it. Of course he had. I turned. He stood 10 yards away beneath the wisteria arch, with the sun behind him and our daughter in Marta's arms somewhere over his shoulder. Guests blurred into polite irrelevance around the edges of my vision. Dante did not. His face had gone still in that specific way it only did when feeling too much cost him actual concentration. Slowly, he came toward me. The boy murmured thank you and vanished. I remained where I was, one hand still lightly on the tray, my own pulse suddenly loud in my ears, not because I was afraid. Because I knew what had just happened, knew what memory I had reached into without trying. When Dante stopped in front of me, his lighter clicked once in his hand. The sound took me all the way back. Ballroom, trembling fingers, black silk, a child hidden under grief, a stranger who was not a stranger for long. Only now there was sun instead of chandeliers, a garden instead of marble stairs, our daughter somewhere laughing herself awake in Marta's arms. And a ring on my right hand that had learned the shape of my skin. You did it again, he said quietly. I smiled despite the sudden tightness in my throat. Apparently I have patterns. Yes, he said just that. But his gaze held mine with such naked recognition that my eyes burned. The first time I had been shaking and trying not to be seen. The first time he had called me little saint like an accusation he didn't know what to do with. Now his hand came to the small of my back, warm, steady, known, and he bent close enough that no one else heard him. Do you know, he said, voice rougher than usual, what it costs me every time you protect the weakest thing in the room before yourself? I shook my head. He looked past me briefly, toward the lawn where Lucia Rosa had begun to fuss in the shade of the fig trees and Gianni was making faces severe enough to count as a public service. Then Dante answered. It cost me the lie that this world gets to keep all of me. The words moved through me slowly, deeply. Until they reached whatever place love had made for itself and settled there like something both earned and dangerous. I touched his wrist. That sounds survivable. Barely, I laughed softly. He watched my mouth for exactly 1 second longer than was decent in public, then took the tray from my hand and set it on the nearest table as if removing obstacles had become his native language. Lucia Rosa's cry sharpened. Instantly both our heads turned. There it was again, the thing that had remade us not into safer people but into more visible ones, a life that needed us. A small, ordinary emergency. Milk, heat, a damp ribbon coming loose. Dante offered me his hand, not because I needed help walking, because now he did it whenever there was somewhere we were both going. I took it. Together we crossed the garden toward our daughter. And because stories do not become false just because they become quiet, I will tell you the truth. I still sometimes wondered what part of Dante would always belong to the dead. To Bianca, to Aldo, to the man he had killed so our child could grow up in a house with sunlight instead of fear. Love did not answer every question, it only made some of them possible to live beside. But when he reached Lucia Rosa and took her from Marta's arms, she calmed the instant his hand settled between her shoulder blades. Steady, certain, gentle, the same man and not the same man at all. He glanced at me over our daughter's soft dark head and clicked the lighter once before slipping it back into his pocket for good. Come here, little saint, he said, so I did. Would you have chosen Dante Salvator and let blood be part of the price of peace?